In this video, we're going to have a look at how we can manage indexes in Pinecone. Now, an index in Pinecone is the highest organizational unit that Pinecone uses. It's where we store our vectors and serves queries over the vectors that it contains. We're going to have a look at how we can get a list of our indexes, create an index, describe an index, and also delete an index. So the first thing, if you haven't already, you will need to pip install the Pinecone client, and then you'll need to import Pinecone. So first we need to initialize our connection to Pinecone. We just head over to app.pinecone.io, and that will open up your Pinecone console. So I'm going to take my quick start API key, and I'm just going to place it here. Now that I've done that, I can have a look at my indexes. So I run this and I get an empty list because I don't currently have any indexes. So what I'm going to do is create one. So I will write pinecone.createIndex. And in here, we first need to pass the index name. So I'm going to write example index. And you also need to pass the dimension of your index. So every index will contain vectors, and all those vectors must have the same number of dimensions. So I'm going to write 128. Now, those are the only two parameters that we need to define. So we can run that, and we will see in a moment that we will now have an example index. So if we go back to list indices up here, we see that we now have one single index. So what I'm going to do now is create another one. So second index. And what we can do is also define a few other parameters. So we can say which index type we'd like to use. Now, by default, this is just an approximated index. So using approximate nearest neighbor search. You can also use exact for exact nearest neighbor search. Now, we are pretty much always going to want to use approximate nearest neighbor search. So I'm going to leave it as it is by default. We can also define our metric. So by default, that is cosine. We could write Euclidean. We can also say how many shards we'd like to allocate to our index. By default, that is just one. And if we would like replicas as well. So we'll go ahead and we'll create that index. And if I list my indexes again, we'll now see that I have two. So what we can now do is go ahead and describe our index. So I'm going to write describe index, and I want to describe our example index. Okay, and we see we have the name, the index type that it's using, so by default it's approximated, the metric, how many replicas, dimensions, shards, and index config. Now, if we decide we don't want to use an index anymore, all we need to do is write pinecone.delete index and pass the name of that index. So I write example index. And now if I list my indexes again, we'll see that we only have the two indexes left. So that's it for this video on managing indexes.